Hello, I'm Louisa Pilbeam. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the US takes a stake in Intel chipmaker, and Donald Trump pledges many more similar deals. Is this a push to support American industry or a slide towards state capitalism and government control over private business? Bangladesh warns it can no longer bear the cost of sheltering Rohingya refugees. That's as international humanitarian aid is declining. But who fills the gap? And could the crisis push the nation's public services to a breaking point? Global meat prices are at an all-time high, fueling fears over food inflation. So why is beef becoming so expensive? And could the spike worsen food insecurity in African nations? Big government is doing big business, but whether corporate America likes it or not is up for debate. The US has taken a stake in Intel chipmaker as part of a wider push to secure domestic production and reduce reliance on China. The acquisition is the most significant intervention in private business since the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. And this may be just the start, with President Donald Trump pledging more deals ahead. Supporters call it smart industrial policy that will protect jobs and national security. But critics warn that it could mark a shift in the relationship between government and private companies and raises concerns about how much control a president should have over business. So why is Donald Trump making such deals? Imogen Kimber reports.
That's fantastic. I love that.
US President Donald Trump says he likes to make deals. His latest deal is buying a 10% stake in the struggling chipmaker Intel, but not for himself, on behalf of the White House.
A lot of people said I invested in Intel. I didn't invest, but I invest my heart in it and my soul because I want the country to be strong. But I said, I'd like you to give 10% of Intel to the United States of America. Not to me, to the United States of America. And he said, I like that idea very much. We have a deal. And I just made $10 billion or $11 billion for the United States of America.
Government investment into private companies has been rare in America. One of the few times the state made private investments was in the 2008 financial crash, when it bought 60% of the car manufacturer General Motors to stop it collapsing. However, this is only one of a number of such deals for Trump. The president also approved the purchase of US steel by Japan's Nippon Steel, only after ensuring he had personal decision-making power in the company. The Pentagon bought 15% of MP Materials, which deals in rare earth. The minerals are key components in many electronic devices. Nvidia and Advanced Micro Devices agreed to pay the government 15% of their revenue from the Chinese market in exchange for export licenses to sell certain chips there. And there is discussion of buying stakes in domestic defence contractors, for example, Lockheed Martin. Trump says it's all good business. It aids national security, ensuring American production of new technologies, and encourages manufacturing at home.
The president wants to put America's needs first, both from a national security and economic perspective, and it's a creative idea that has never been done before to ensure that we're both reshoring these critical supply chains while also gaining something of it for the American taxpayer.
But critics say it actually means aspects of national security are up for sale, and it restrains the US market and is essentially state capitalism, where the government has a hand in the economy and owns major companies but for profit, unlike in classical socialism. This flies in the face of free market capitalism, usually supported by Republicans. However, these policies have gained the support from former presidential candidate, left-wing Senator Bernie Sanders. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Harry Broadman is a former chief of staff at the US President's Council of Economic Advisers who served under George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. And he joins us from Washington, D.C. Harry, thank you very much for joining us. So a big question is, why has Donald Trump taken this 10% stake in Intel? Is this about shoring up a company, or is there more at play here?
Well, it's certainly shoring up a company. I also think it is consistent increasingly with how he has dealt with corporate behavior and corporate investment in the United States, sort of a more of a statist approach, if you will.
State capitalism, though, is nothing new. So governments have been investing in companies and industries to boost business and protect them. China, Russia, France, Germany, for example. But does this particularly go against what the US does? Because it goes against the Republican gospel of free market capitalism.
Well, what used to be the Republican gospel of free market capitalism, I think, has been shifting to the left, if you will, more towards statist approaches in the United States. Now, listen, there are certainly cases where we want a more proactive government, particularly when it deals with patching up national security gaps, making sure that the infrastructure for the global economy in which the U.S. is participant is more robust. So there are justifications for that, but whether it's a broad brushed approach, that's a very different animal, I think, than what we in the United States have prided ourselves on in terms of our economic model.
And let me ask you, Harry, Donald Trump has called this a great deal for Intel and the American people. Do you believe that's so?
I think so. I mean, again, listen, both the legislative branch and the executive branch over the last couple of decades have recognized the importance of that technology, both, for our own economic growth, but more importantly, to maintain our competitiveness, particularly against, countries like China, which obviously have a much more statist approach, to say the least, than we do. So there is a justification, an economic justification, and a policy justification for having the federal government, and in some cases even the state governments, get involved to make sure that we have a robust infrastructure and competitiveness against other countries in the world, and I say in particularly with respect to China.
Let me look at the concerns for a moment, though. This isn't the only deal that the US has done recently. There's the Nvidia and AMD deal, where those US companies have agreed to pay the government 15% of their revenues from sales of chips to, as you mentioned, China. So are these kinds of deals overreach?
Well, I mean, if you look back at the history of how the United States is operating, it probably does seem like overreach. But, and there's another example, of course, with respect to the merger of U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel. So when there are, what we would call backbone industries, particularly in technology, but also in steel making and other manufacturing sectors that are just important for the growth of the world economy and the U.S. economy, I can understand there is this justification. Now, it's a very different, I think, paradigm than other countries, particularly state-run economies such as China and so forth. So I think as long as it's done on a case-by-case basis, and that there are safeguards that would limit the reach of the government, then there is a justification for this. But I guess the concern that people have, particularly myself, is that Mr. Trump does not seem to operate from a stable playbook, and so what he might do one week might be different than the next week. And I think that if there was a rationale that he would articulate, say in a speech or in some kind of report by the cabinet, saying this is the way we need to operate now, that would be most helpful to understand for the public and for investors and for workers as to what the rationale is. And so far, he's not done that. He's been doing these on a case-by-case approach, and I think that makes a lot of people, including myself, nervous.
What about corporate America's response then? Are companies like Intel quietly ceding ground to Trump, avoiding confrontation and giving him unprecedented leverage over private business?
I guess I'm not surprised in this environment that is happening. And again, I think, if Intel were to announce and justify why they are doing this in this particular matter and how it fits in with their overall corporate strategy as a competitor in the world, I think that kind of justification would be very helpful. But at least for those of us on the outside, we just see these announcements with very little rationale explained as to what is going on and why Intel itself would say, well, this is in our best interest. Now, the fact that increasingly businesses in the U.S. are kowtowing to Mr. Trump, that I think shows how much power he has amassed in the Oval Office, and the threats that he makes to industries obviously are ringing true to some captains of industry. And I think that that's the issue is, are people so intimidated that they're not willing to articulate and say, well, let's do it this way, Mr. President. And now maybe that took place, but we don't know. And that's why I say having some kind of transparency and explanation as to the rationale of this that might be done jointly, for instance, by Intel and the president, that would be a huge step forward, because he keeps moving from moving the goalpost from here to there, and players on the team to say, well, we'll follow you whatever you want to do. And I think that is strikingly different than what the U.S. economy has been the leader of in the world for decades.
Well, we will see how this plays out. Harry Broadman, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, they've fled mass violence, including arson and sexual assaults at the hands of the military in Myanmar in 2017. Today, more than 1 million Muslim Rohingya live in dire conditions in the world's largest refugee camp in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. But international aid to support them is shrinking, and food vouchers have been cut in half, leaving many families surviving on barely $6 a month. The humanitarian crisis has stretched public services in Bangladesh to the limit and is spilling into the economy. Interim government leader Mohammed Yunus now says his country is running out of resources to support Rohingya refugees. He's urging the international community to step in and to work on a roadmap for the Rohingyas' voluntary return to Myanmar. Tanvir Chowdhury reports from Cox's Bazar.
More than 1 million Rohingya refugees live here in Cox's Bazar. It's the largest refugee camp in the world, but also one of the most densely populated. They came over the past 8 years fleeing ethnic-based violence in Myanmar. At this conference, the government says there has been a big impact on Bangladesh.
The impact on our economy, resources, environment, and ecosystem, society, and governance have been huge. I thank our host community and the people of Bangladesh for their wholehearted support and enormous sacrifices for the Rohingyas.
It's estimated the refugees need cost around $1.2 billion a year. But since 2025, aid has begun to dry up as global development funding has been slashed, particularly by the U.S., which supplied 55% of the humanitarian response in Bangladesh. This is problematic for Bangladesh.
This is a very concerning situation, and particularly for Bangladesh, where we already have limited fiscal space for the country for meeting the priorities of the country. And now, with the reduction of aid, this is going to be a huge strain on Bangladesh economy.
As donor support shrinks for the displaced Rohingya, the Bangladesh government may be forced to divert its own limited resources to provide health, security, and other basic services for the refugees. With the global funding at crisis point, essential services for Rohingya refugees are at risk, leaving the needs of both new arrivals and existing populations unmet. Many refugees already face a reduction in the aid they receive, with some getting half their previous monthly budget, been forced to live on pulses and rice. Meanwhile, as violence continues, more people are reportedly arriving.
We are such an oppressed community. We are asking the world for justice. The government of Myanmar tortured us. If Bangladesh wants to send us back to Myanmar, we want equal rights like other ethnic groups.
That's why the government is using this conference to appeal to the international community and put the plight of the Rohingya back in the spotlight. In September, there will be another high-level conference on the sideline of the United Nations General Assembly. But more aid can come soon enough for Bangladesh's strained budget and the people who are suffering. Tanvir Chowdhury, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost, Cox's Bazar.
Mr. Fizur Rahman is an economist and distinguished fellow at the Centre for Policy Dialogue. He joins us from Dhaka now. Thank you for giving us your time. So have we hit a breaking point in the Rohingya crisis?
Thank you for having me. I think it is going towards that. The Rohingya refugees, who in Bangladesh we call them forcefully displaced Myanmar nationals, and Bangladesh gave them a place on a humanitarian grounds. So there are almost 1.3 million Rohingyas now, and obviously there is now, after so many years, there is an aid fatigue also. And Bangladesh also is becoming desperate because it is bearing the brunt of the people, and we are trying to do the best, but obviously it's now becoming unbearable. Also because, as I said, the supply of foreign support is also coming down. There is a problem that's arising from that.
This is clearly a devastating situation for the Rohingya people. But we also have now the Bangladesh interim leader saying that his country can no longer afford to bear the brunt of the biggest refugee camp in the world. A huge economic strain over 8 years. How devastating has this been for Bangladesh's economy?
Bangladesh economy obviously is a large economy. We are a $460 billion economy. But in a country where poverty is so rampant, where there are so many people living below the poverty line, and also in the locality where the Rohingyas are, obviously it's a big strain on the local economy as well. Bangladesh's own expenditure on health, education, and sanitation is not very much because of our low revenue GDP ratio of about only 8%. So obviously, any additional money that is being spent on Rohingyas, it creates a lot of strain on the budgetary allocations and the public service delivery at the local level. So there is obviously a growing concern, if I would say maybe discontent also in the locality. When there is
Mr. Fisser, you
support
mentioned
coming.
International aid decline there. And I want to ask you that with that declining, is it foreseeable for Bangladesh to continue without more help?
It is very difficult, in fact, and that's why Professor Yunus, the head of the interim government of Bangladesh, said that we cannot really wait for the last Rohingyas to be driven to Bangladesh from Rakhine. So that's a clear signal that Bangladesh is really reaching a breaking point. And the Cox's Bazar event that took place during 24th and 26th August, there were 7 points that he mentioned. And he said that there has to be more aid coming. There has to be more global initiative in order that they can return to their homeland in safety and under guarantee of safety. So I think that Bangladesh is now reaching a point where if more aid is not coming, and if tangible and visible initiatives are not taken by the global community, it will be not only a strain on Bangladesh, but it will be a problem to sustain as it is.
What is life like for the Rohingya people? We've heard that the World Food Programme is going to need to halve their food vouchers from $12 to $6 a month. What can they survive on this? What is life like for them?
Obviously, you see, $12 a month for a person, you can very well understand what this can buy, even in the context of the purchasing power in Bangladesh. Obviously, very little, but that's what was the budget. But now, if it comes down from $12 to $6, obviously people will suffer. We know that, for example, half the 1.3 million people who are there, they are children, half of them.
every year about 30,000 babies are born. Surveys indicate that about 40% of the children, they suffer from stunting and wasting, and also lack of nutrition obviously is having its adverse impact on all the people, not only children, but on all the people. And also I think about the other needs of the children, education, for example. So all these are creating a situation where, of course, nutrition comes first, but that will also be put under question if it comes down to that. We are hoping that the 11 countries which came up with a declaration at the conference, that they will also come up with money, and World Food Program and the local NGOs who are working over there, they have enough funds and in-kind support for these people. Otherwise, it is already a humanitarian crisis, but it will accentuate further.
Mustafizur Rahman, an important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Putting beef on the table has never cost more, with prices soaring worldwide. Global meat prices are at record highs, pushing food costs to the highest level in 2 years. The surge is being driven by droughts that have reduced cattle herds, disease outbreaks, and disrupted supplies. Trump's tariffs and trade tensions have supported the price rally. For many people in wealthy countries, it's a budget squeeze. But in poorer nations, it could make protein a luxury that many families can no longer afford. American shoppers, for example, paid almost $7 for almost half a kilo of beef in July. That's a record price. Meat prices are also rocketing in the UK, Australia, Canada and South Africa, among other nations. One of the main drivers of spiking costs is a drought that has affected several states in the US and Europe, while Trump's tariffs are hitting major beef suppliers such as Brazil. And demand for the staple food is growing in China. Fintan Monaghan tells us more on how the price increase is affecting many people in South Africa.
The weekly shop in South Africa has become stressful for some. Food prices are at their highest since September 2024, thanks to inflation. But most expensive of all is meat.
Meat is very expensive. It has become so expensive that we can't even afford to buy, to eat meat every day like before.
Well, you fill your trolley thinking it's going to be 300 rand, and when you come to the till, it's 600 rand.
Some people say they've given up meat altogether.
It's becoming too expensive, therefore I changed my diet to vegetables.
The cost of meat has increased by almost 30%. Far more than on other food and on fuel. That's because meat prices are pushed up due to production costs. The cost of imported animal feed has gone up as the value of local currency has dropped. There was also an increase in production of beef in 2024 and a reduction of imports of poultry due to avian flu in Brazil, which supplies 20% of South Africa's chicken, both of which meant less meat available this year. And there is an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. This combination makes the price increase difficult to control, particularly on beef.
For the time being, it's just going to be like this for a long time until it comes down, probably after Christmas or whatever. But for now, the prices have gone up so greatly. It's unbelievable. It's been like this for the past couple of about 4 or 5 months now.
Many customers don't have hope the price hike will end anytime soon.
Wandile Silobo is Chief Economist of the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa. He joins us from Pretoria in South Africa. Thank you so much for being on the programme. If we focus on South Africa now, meat prices have risen by 30% there. That's a big number. Can people in South Africa afford this?
We are coming from a low base in South Africa, so there is a base effect aspect that is playing part on this. But we generally view the increases that we are observing temporary, because there are two things that are changing. One, the ban on the imports of poultry from Brazil has now been lifted because Brazil has managed to control the outbreak that they suffered there on avian influenza. That will help on chicken meat. With regards to beef, the big thing in South Africa is the ongoing foot and mouth disease. Of course, that did lead to a decline in slaughtering, but we've seen now across the country vaccination getting some momentum, and we hope that over time that will lead to an increase in slaughtering, which is why we generally see this as somewhat of a short-term temporary increase, and we should see prices moderating towards the end of the year.
Bearing that in mind, though, what about inflation and the cost of living in South Africa, which is a concern for many people? Will this fuel that?
Inflation is, of course, a concern because right now, if you look at the figures from July, overall, the food price inflation was around 5.5%, which is the highest in about 18 months. The good thing about the current moment is that there is also a large grain harvest that is coming into the market, and as well as the fruit harvest. We've had a bumper crop, but there's always a lag between the increase in the harvest and the decline in farm prices between what you see at a retail level, which is why we think that the prices that you are currently seeing, all the way perhaps maybe going even in the August prices, will still be at these relatively elevated levels, with the hope then that as you enter the fourth quarter of the year, you should see some moderation. But certainly, as you rightly say, there is some strain in the households.
You said there's hope that this will improve by the end of the year, but what about the government? Is there a belief that the government's doing enough?
The South African government is doing something because remember, we do have some household support that the government has extended in the country. But of course, that doesn't take away, because the core problem of South Africa is also that we do have a relatively large population that lives in poverty, roughly 20% or so of South Africans that are in a tough condition. So whenever there's some increases in food prices, those people are hit the hardest, which is why we hope now then that with the large grain harvest and a large fruit harvest, that to a certain extent will make an impact. But certainly on a government side, there is something that is happening. But remember, there's a fiscal strain and the limits to what can be done in the near term.
Wandile Silubu, we really appreciate your time. Thank you. That is our show for this week. Do get in touch with us on X. I'm at Louisa Pilbeam TV. Use the hashtag AJCTC when you do that. Or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC, and that will take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Louisa Pilbeam from the whole team. Thank you for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is up next.